health, financial, and home improvement. Now sit back and listen to experts in family law, association law, hearing loss, business brokers, home care, along with many other topics. Now here are your hosts, Steve-O and Sophia.
Hey, good morning, South Florida. Welcome to another Ask the Expert show where we bring you the finest experts in the field of legal, health, financial, and home improvement. I got to tell you, you never know who's listening to our show. We just had a email because we promote the show a couple days out before the show, and we just got an email from somebody in New York who has residence also in South Florida, who's getting ready to come down to South Florida, I guess, for the next 6 months. But she listens to the show all the time, and she had someone who handles her estate planning. But after listening to Rosenberg Law Firm, which we're getting ready to introduce you to Andy Rosenberg, she said, when I come in, I am going to make an appointment to meet with Mr. Rosenberg just after watching this show, and I sure appreciate it. So let me welcome our expert, Andrew Rosenberg. Good morning, Andrew.
Hey, good morning, Steve-O. Happy Monday. How are you?
Good. That's a great way to start off the morning. You never know who's listening to the show. She listens to the show up in New York, but she always tunes into our South Florida show because she has a residence. I think she said she lives in Deerfield 6 months out of the year.
Yeah. So, it's interesting. That's funny because when I do my workshops, um, I get, questions all the time during the workshop. And one of the typical questions I get is, hey, listen, if I live in two different states, or if I'm planning on moving down here to be Florida as my quote main residence, because you can only have one homestead type property. What do we do about my documents that are up in New York or New Jersey or in the East Coast or wherever they're located? And my answer to that question is always the same. You need to meet with someone like me, an estate planning / elder law attorney, if you're moving to a new state, and that includes if you move down here to Florida, and you need to have that reviewed by that particular estate attorney, because the laws are completely different in each state when it comes to a lot of the documentation. So unfortunately, a lot of times we're going to have to redo a lot of not all of it, but we'll have to redo a lot of the documentation to make it state specific for down here in Florida. So when I have clients that work with me for years and years and years as clients down here, and then they end up moving to a different state, I tell them, listen, you need to meet with someone like me in their state, because the odds are that you're going to have to probably make some changes to your durable powers, healthcare surrogates, living wills, things of that nature, and will, and maybe trust. There might be some minor changes to the trust because every state has unique set of rules and laws, and we need to make sure they comply for the state you're living in.
Well, we also received a text from a listener in Davie wanting to know how they could find your past shows with us. And just so you know, we're on about 75 platforms. We are on so many platforms, but the best way I like is just go to iHeart, go to their platforms in iHeart on their podcast, and just go to Ask the Expert South Florida Wills and Estate Planning, and you can see all of Andy's past shows. Uh, people love the way you explain the law to them. And I think it's so important because a lot of people don't understand what estate planning even is.
Yeah. Listen, I've been doing this a long time. I'm getting old. All right. I mean,
You don't look it. You don't look it, bro.
Well, listen, I take care of myself. I work out a lot and I eat right and all that stuff. But I mean, I've had a hip replacement. I've had a knee replacement. I've had rotator surgery. You name it. I've had a lot of athletic injuries over the years. I'm 57, so I'm definitely old.
You look great.
But with that, thanks. But with that experience comes, over the years, I've learned how to make it so that I bring it to a level that makes that I think I try to make it to a level that people can understand things, because it doesn't. I don't like when someone talks over me, meaning that they think I'm not bright or I don't understand things. So they're going to talk above me because they think that that's going to get me to move forward with them. And I'm like, no, that's not how I work, man. I mean, that's just not it. I want people to understand because I want them to understand what their choices are. And then I want them to make the right choice for them. Because, usually it comes down to when I meet with with people, they usually have maybe 2 to 3 different options, and then I let them make the educated decision based on their particular circumstance. But they need to understand it. So yeah, I take pride. It's funny. I got 2 kids. I don't even remember how old they are, Steve-O. Um,
Oh, you remember their names?
yeah, I do remember the names.
Okay.
And I do know this. They're still on payroll. I'm trying to get them off payroll. I can tell you that. I got one that's, I think, my daughter Allie's 27 and basically off payroll. She's getting ready to hopefully get a full-time job as a nurse practitioner. And then my son Jason's a first-year law student at Duke, believe it or not.
Whoa.
Yeah,
Great school.
They're both very smart kids. But I made them come to the workshops because I talk about my family a lot. I try and really at the workshops, I really try and I tell real life stories. This is what's going on, and here's what happens in my family. And my kids I made them come and first off, they get embarrassed because I talk about them in the workshop. But they actually, my son, when he went to the workshop after the show, I got home. He gave me a big hug and a kiss. I go, "What's this for?" He goes, "Dad," he goes, "you make it so enjoyable to watch, and you bring it down to a level that even I understood, and I'm not in law school yet." And I said, "Okay, good." So I do take pride in that. Yeah, I really do. It's really important to me. In fact, Steve-O, I just started the preliminary outline of I'm writing a book, and so for the
I didn't
listeners
know
out there,
that.
yeah. I'm just starting. I don't know how long it will take for me to do it, but my tagline, just so you know, I do a lot of videos and everything else, and this is
I
kind
see
of
them.
maybe, yeah. And at the end, I always tell a story about something, and then at the end, I always look in the camera. I say, "Remember that if you don't plan, you're stupid," and that's going to be the title of my book. If you don't plan, you're stupid.
Wonderful. A- Andy, are you surprised about people who are very intelligent, maybe CEOs of companies that really haven't spent time with putting a will or a trust together? I was surprised about that.
No. You know what? I've kind of learned to not be surprised over 30 years of practice. Um, and here's a real life example, Steve-O. Recent, very recent. Okay, Gene Hackman, right? Gene Hackman.
Yeah,
Okay, so I just read over the weekend. I was telling my wife, I go, I wonder if he had an estate plan in place because a lot of times the ultra wealthy don't even do estate planning. I mean, look at Joe Robbie down here in Florida. They had to sell the Dolphins because they didn't have planning in place for taxes. They had to sell it because they owed a ton of taxes. That's why they sold the team, the Miami Dolphins. Uh, Prince, prime example of someone that didn't have an estate plan. Gene Hackman, really interesting. I read about it this weekend and I said, there could be some issues going on. And then sure enough, when I read what was tentatively going on, here's what he did. And this guy's worth, he's worth apparently $80 million. That's a
okay.
lot of freaking money,
Yeah,
right? So you're saying CEOs, all these, so, here's a guy worth 80 million. And you know what he had in place? He had a
no.
basic will. He had a basic will. And
Wow.
and it wasn't even that good of a will. And here's what I mean. So in his will, from what I've read, I haven't seen the will or anything. This is just what I've read in the papers. So from what I read, he had everything going to his spouse, who was much younger, which makes sense. So when he
Right.
died, everything's going to his spouse. But here's the kicker: he didn't have anything after that. And so he's got, I think, 3 children, and apparently he appears he did not have a very good relationship with the 3 children. And he basically wrote them out. He said, "I'm not giving them anything. I'm giving 100% of my assets to my wife, who's much younger." Well, he didn't, obviously, they didn't think about, well, what happens if he outlives her, which is exactly what happened in this situation. So he outlived her. His will says everything goes to his wife. The problem is she didn't survive. So now what's going to happen? So from what I'm reading, it's kind of interesting. I think the way it's set up is it's going to go 50% to his wife's estate, and I think she has her estate going to charity, which is very nice. And then the other 50% is going by state statute because he didn't have contingencies in place in his basic will to the three kids. So now Gene Hackman's estate is going to be a disaster. And now I heard that his kids are already filing suits trying to get 100% of the estate, and it's going to be a whole battle. So you mentioned, does it surprise me that people that, CEOs of companies and business owners and people with this or that don't have estate plans? The majority of people, Steve-O, don't have an estate plan. And if they do, they have really basic stuff, and it may not be appropriate for them.
Well, I'm not trying to one up with you, but we still get so many letters. The estate planning attorney who had been with us for 8 years for South Florida, I'm not, the name is, you know who the name is, his
Yep.
son murdered him.
Yes.
And one of the things is his son was somehow able to get his hands on over $400,000 of the mother's, I guess, of her estate. And here is an estate planning attorney that was probably the furthest thing from his mind.
Of course.
But I think what's so important with what you do, Andy, is, you take away all the emotional, and this is what could happen to you, things that someone else would never think about. I hear it's an estate planning attorney, probably, the worst thing could happen is his son murdering him and stealing money from the estate. Who would ever think that? But that's one of the things you do. You think way past what could happen, right?
Yeah, I mean, my responsibility, hopefully, is to make sure that we try. Listen, no one's perfect, Steve-O. Everyone
Right.
makes mistakes, okay? And I tell my clients when I sit down with them to go over their estate plan, I go, let's go over everything to make sure I didn't screw it up. I go, no one's perfect. I just want to make sure I got the name spelled right. I got the assets going where they're supposed to go based on what you want, etc. And the majority of the time, I have everything set up right. Every now and then, I have a typo or something that I have to fix their name. But yeah, my job is to try and think of all the different contingencies, which people do and don't like. They do like it because we're thinking well above what they're thinking. They don't like it
Right.
because they have to think. They have to think about it. Oh my God, never thought of that before. I don't know what I would do if this were to happen. I said, well, you need to tell me because that's what we need to also plan for because you just never know. So it's kind of interesting. And then, hey, can I talk to you about something that came up this week in my
Anything.
office? And it really, really, really bothered me. And I wanted to I thought, you know what? This is something I should talk to Steve-O about on air. So, I do estate planning, but I also do elder care planning, which is, proper Medicaid planning. People that unfortunately need to go into an assisted living or a nursing home. And we want to try and protect those assets and the income that they've built up all their lifetimes. And there's legally ways to move things around with the proper estate planning documents, etc., to make sure everything's set up so you can get qualified for the Medicaid. That's called elder law planning and Medicaid planning. So I do that as well. And I had a scenario where I had a mother and then I had a couple of children involved. And it was for the mom. The mom is in need to go to a nursing home. She doesn't have long-term care insurance, which I tell everybody that's the best way to have coverage is if you have long-term care insurance coverage to pay for this. But unfortunately, it's too expensive and the rates are going up like crazy and most people don't have it. So then we got to try and protect assets. So anyway, so I'm planning for the mom and one of the siblings, one of the children starts getting involved with the planning process. and
Good.
starts giving me orders as the attorney.
Mm.
Like, hey, you know what? You can't do this. You can't do that. I need to be in the meetings. I need to do this. I need to do that. And I had to put the children in place a little bit. Not on, I don't like doing that, but legally I need to let them understand that you're not the client. The client's the mom.
Right.
And if the mom wants to do whatever she wants, and she may have done exactly what the children want her to do. I didn't even get that far. And I said, if the mom wants to do whatever she wants to do with her assets for this Medicaid planning purpose, that's her decision. And you can't come into the meeting with me and sit down with mom and be there with mom while we're discussing this stuff because it's confidential information and there would be undue influence and everything else of that nature. And she wanted in the contract, in the actual retainer agreement contract, she wanted me to make sure that she was in all the meetings with her mom. And I basically told her, you can go fly a kite.
Yeah, right.
Because that's not how it works. And that's not, attorney-client privilege. And it's just not, you need to understand who's the client. You're not the client. It's not your money. It's not your decision making.
How did she react to that?
She wasn't happy. And I basically fired them all. I basically said, you're not welcome in my firm and I don't want to work with you. And she appreciated it and said, I understand. And so I'm sure she'll go to another attorney and maybe that other attorney will honor that request. But it really bothered me, Steve-O. And people need to understand that it's serious business that what I'm doing. And I'm determining with you as the client what you want to happen if God forbid you become disabled or incapacitated. Who do you want to have take care of you health-wise? Who should make healthcare decisions? Or who should make those financial decisions if you can't make them? Or God forbid when you pass away, who do you want to write out of the will? Do you want one of the kids to not get anything, or do you want everyone to get equal shares? Do you want it all to go to charity? Whatever you want to do. And it's not the children that make those decisions because it's your money. In the state of Florida, there's a couple things that are certain. Number one, you can write your kids off. You don't have to give them a penny. Whether you want to or not, that's your decision. As long as you understand that you don't have to legally give them a penny, you can write off every child that you have. That's number one. Number two, you can never write off your spouse. You have to give your spouse a portion. It's called an elective share. And at a minimum, if you tried to write off your spouse, they're legally entitled to 30% of the estate, even if you tried to write them out. Okay? The only way that they couldn't get it is if there's a prenuptial agreement or a postnuptial agreement that states that. Other than that, if you tried to write out your spouse, legally in the state of Florida, they have the right to what's called an elective share. So you can write out the family and everyone else, but kids included, but you cannot write out your spouse.
What if there's a divorce?
Divorce is different. Obviously, if you're divorced, it's technically you're no longer married, and so the spouse will not receive anything. However, I will see this happen a lot, Steve-O, and it's unfortunate. Part of the estate planning process should be, I sit down with my clients, I give them the option to sit down with me on a yearly basis to review their estate plan, which also includes reviewing beneficiary documents, such as, wills, life insurance, annuities, 401ks, IRAs, all that kind of stuff. They all have beneficiary forms. If you don't change the beneficiary from your spouse that you divorced to someone else and you die and it's still the spouse, that could be a major problem. There was a big case, I think it was in, I forget what state it was in actually, where a divorced spouse, they were divorced for like 30 years and the spouse never changed the beneficiary on the IRA, and the divorced spouse got like a $2 million IRA.
Oh, wow.
The kids got nothing. So the answer to your question is, yeah, technically, if you're divorced, legally, they're not going to get anything if it goes through probate, that type of stuff. But if we don't make changes in their trust documents, or you don't make changes in your beneficiary form documentation, it's going to be a problem. So it's kind of interesting. But the reason I wanted to bring this whole thing up, Steve-O, is I just wanted to remind people that the client is you. It's not your kids. Your kids cannot tell me what they want done unless they're the power of attorney and you have no control over anything. It's you as the client that's going to determine how your assets are going to go. And for the kids to try and butt in and get involved, that's a disaster waiting to happen. And this example I just gave, I just basically told the family, listen, I'm no longer going to represent you guys. I'm not moving forward. I don't really care what you guys want to do. You guys go on your own. I don't want any part of it at this point because we have a child that's unreasonable and is expecting things that are not legally correct.
Andy, how do you handle the power of attorney? Isn't there a lot of fighting that goes on and people who get their feelings hurt?
So the power of attorney is a really interesting topic, Steve-O. I have a whole section in my workshop where we just talk about that for probably 10 to 15 minutes or more. And so it's kind of interesting, Steve-O. The law changed in Florida many years ago, okay? So there's different types of powers of attorney. Let's explain what they are so that you can understand them. There's something called a limited power of attorney, which is exactly what you think it sounds like. It's limited to whatever power you want to give that particular person. So let's say that my wife, Debbie, and I will go out of town and we're going on vacation and we're trying to sell our house. And while we're away on vacation, we want to give both my kids the ability to sign the contract if needed so that we can not have delays in the process. I'd never do that, by the way, but that's besides the point. But that's limited to just the real estate, right? That's a limited power. Then there's something called a general power of attorney, which is exactly the opposite, which means you're naming somebody completely in charge of all your assets. They can go in and liquidate your account if they wanted to. They can do whatever they want. They're their general power. And then what you're talking about, Steve-O, is something called a durable power, if I'm not mistaken. Is that what you're talking about? So the durable power is kind of different. And here's what's changed, at least in Florida. I don't know what it is in New York and other states, obviously. I'm only talking about Florida. Basically what happened is Florida used to have something called a springing power of attorney, which means that the durable power did not spring to life until we have doctor's notes stating that you're disabled. So it wouldn't work until you became disabled. We got rid of that because the banking lobby and all these other lobbies didn't like it. It was too difficult to deal with. So now we have a general durable power of attorney, which means as soon as we sign it, it's up and running and working. And if we become disabled, it continues to work. So it's a big difference between what was old springing and what is new, the general durable power. I don't like the new law, but it is what it is. Your question is, do we get fights? My answer to that question is I try not to name an even number of powers of attorney. I mean, if you got 2 kids, name one and then name an alternate. If you got 3 kids, you can name all 3 together and then the majority will rule. So that's kind of a general rule to think about out there when you're dealing with who do you want to name to handle your finances in the future.
Your show goes by so fast, Andy. For those of you who are listening on iHeart or Spotify right now and cannot see the YouTube, tell people how they can reach your office.
Sure. I can be reached a couple ways. My email address is Andrew, ANDREW, at rosenberglawfirm.net. That's ROSENBERG, lawfirm.net. And then my phone number is 954-755-7803. And don't forget, we have 2 upcoming workshops coming up. We have one on Medicaid and estate planning, March 24th, 6 o'clock at the Sonata Coconut Creek. And then we have another one on March 26th at Total One in Pembroke Pines. It's called Estate Planning Essentials, and that's going to be, I believe, at 5:30. Again, please call the office, 954-755-7803, if you have an interest in attending any one of those.
Andy will be back again with us next month. I love doing this show with you, Andy. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful week, and we'll see you again next month.
You too, buddy. Talk to you later.
That's attorney Andrew Rosenberg. Hey, that's it for us today. We'll be back again with you next week with more Ask the Experts.
Thanks for tuning in today to the Ask the Expert show on W4CY Radio and Talk4 TV. Tune in next week and every week to hear more from our experts on personal injury, insurance, air condition repairs, estate planning, Medicare, and many other topics in the areas of legal, health, financial, and home improvement. See you next week.